Welcome, everyone, and I'm very glad that you could join us today. My name is Megan Poole, and I'm the Central Regional Coordinator of the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I recently got married, so while many of you may know me by my maiden name, which is Adams, my married name is now Poole, so hello. I will be the host and the question moderator for today's webinar, which is Snapshots of the Past, Indiana State Historical Marker Program. And today's presenter is Casey Pfeiffer, Historical Marker Program Director of the Indiana Historical Bureau Division. In this program, you'll learn about the process and the criteria for obtaining a state historical marker, why markers matter, and their continued relevance in today's digital age. This program will also examine how to research for state markers used for other IHB programs. After this webinar has been transcribed, it will be available on the Indiana State Library's archived webinars page. And I will also be sending out that link to all of you in emails. If you are watching an archived recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEU is in the video's description in YouTube. So without further ado, let's get started. Thank you again, Casey, for joining us today. I will hand the presentation over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Meg. Good morning, everyone. It is so great to be here with all of you today. I'm looking forward to talking to you about the Indiana State Historical Marker Program. As Meg said, I'm Casey Pfeiffer. I'm the Historical Marker Program Director here, and I've been in this role for about 12 years now, so it has gone quite fast, but I'm excited, again, to delve into these markers with you. I thought we'd start just by looking at the history of the Indiana Historical Bureau for those who may be unfamiliar with the organization. Let's see, here we go. For those who don't know what the Bureau is, we were actually founded in 1915 under the name the Indiana Historical Commission with the intent of helping to plan and coordinate programs for the centennial statehood, which was being celebrated then in 1916. So the State Library, as many of you know, is celebrating its bicentennial this year. So they have about 90 years on us, but both organizations continue to go strong. In 1925, we were reorganized as the Indiana Historical Bureau. And at that time, a new board was created, the Indiana Library and Historical Board, that placed both the Indiana State Library and the Bureau under one organizing and board. So they kind of oversaw both institutions. By 2018, the Bureau had merged into the Indiana State Library, and that is how we exist today. We're a division of the library. During that 2018 merger, different departments within the library reorganized. So IHB took over kind of rare books and manuscripts, digital initiatives, and the public history departments. That has since been broken out again this year. So IHB is kind of separate as its own division, but rare books and manuscripts, we work very closely with them. I'll talk about that here in a little bit as we go through the presentation, as well as digital initiatives. So things like Hoosier State Chronicles, Indiana Memory, which the Indiana State Library oversees. If you do have questions about those type of programs, feel free to reach out either to me, to Meg, or others here at the State Library. We can get you in touch with the right people here who can help you answer those questions. The mission statement of the Historical Bureau provides publications, programs, and other opportunities for Indiana citizens of all ages to learn and teach about the history of their communities, the state of Indiana, and their relationships to the nation and the world. As you can imagine, over 100 years of history of this organization. We've involved in several programs and publications over the years. For much of our early history, it was print publications, much of the Indiana series, things like Indiana Public Opinion in World War I. We produced from 1916 through early, I believe it's 2001, a publication called the Indiana History Bulletin, which looked at what communities were doing across the state. Research practices was, again, some of our marker surveys were included in that. And then we also had a publication called the Indiana Historian, which was a really accessible publication for people of all ages to learn about different topics in Indiana history. Some of those would come from marker topics, and some of them would help inspire marker topics. We also have been involved in several conferences and organizing those over the years, namely over the last 10 years, the Hoosier Women at Work Conference. I don't know if there's anyone on the call who has attended that over the years, but it's been a great opportunity to promote scholarship in women's history throughout the state. And of course, all these programs, the most visible and really bread and butter program of the Bureau over the last 75 years has been the State Historical Marker Program. Now, when the Bureau was founded in 1915, we did help and assist with local communities in promoting their history, finding ways they can commemorate that history. And much of that was local signage, helping to keep surveys of what local communities were doing. By the 1930s, the Bureau really started getting involved in a much more standard state format marker program. So today here, we'll talk a little bit about how the marker program has evolved over the years. We'll look at what a standard historical marker looks like so you can identify those versus local markers in your community. As Meg said, we'll talk about the process for obtaining a historical marker, how you can find them, and really the main goal of this presentation is why historical markers continue to matter in the communities across the state of Indiana and across our nation. So I started alluding to this, but in the 1930s, we partnered with the WPA on a local signage program. I shouldn't say local, a state signage program, but communities across the state were integral in this. And these were thinly rolled sheet metal signs, painted black and white. They often included an image on them, very limited text. But again, when we talk about a snapshot in history, this was a really great introductory point for people learning about the history of their communities. Unfortunately, these signs, because they were so thinly rolled, hundreds were able to be produced in a very short period of time, but they also were not sustainable. So by the early 1940s, many were being recycled, taken down, in disrepair, and many were actually recycled for the war effort. Come 1946, World War II is over, and there's a very concerted effort to have a permanent marker program that can commemorate the history of our state. And this fits in with marker programs really across the nation at this time. You really start to see some official marker programs rising up during this post-war period. More Americans are taking to the roads, incorporating trips at historic stops in their family vacations. So they really start to snowball from here and really grow in the number that you see. As you can imagine, the program has evolved a lot since those early markers in the 1940s. We really only have a handful of those that are still standing. Really, in 1960s is when you start to see a huge growth in the program, and that has continued. There's obviously been ebbs and flows on interest over the years, but really since 2016 and the state's bicentennial, we've seen interest continue to spike. Both in the number of people applying for new markers, attending dedications, letting us know when a marker is in need of repair. As we look at other ways that the program has evolved, we think about research standards. If you look and come into our Bureau space, you can see some of our research files from 1940s, 50s, 60s. Oftentimes, it's a couple sheets of documentation, maybe upwards of 20, that has maybe some county histories in it, some other secondary sources that would help to share the history of these topics. Really, one of the biggest changes in the program and in the criteria over the years has been ensuring that we have primary sources to support any statement that goes on a marker. And so you'll see as the program has gone on and evolved, those research files become much more extensive. So if you're looking to find more information about a marker that was installed here in the 2000s, probably going to go through an inch to several inches of paper files of documentation that we've accumulated on that topic. It's a lot considering the amount of text that goes onto a marker, but we had always tried to find other ways that we could share the history that maybe that didn't make it into the text. And again, making sure that it was more than just one source to support a statement. If we could find a variety of sources, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit as well in terms of what goes into the research to successfully craft a marker text. The other thing that has changed, of course, is the range of topics. You look at a lot of our early markers, several markers denoting the state capitol, military history, political history. The thing with these markers, and they are important and still serve to tell a very important story, both in terms of how the program has evolved, but of notable individuals in Indiana history. The thing is, many of those markers are even more limited in text than you would imagine. And so it'll say something to the effect of, this individual served in the Indiana General Assembly from this period of years. Important, but what did they do? How did they contribute to the state of Indiana? How did they fit into, the historical period at that time? So that's something that we've really tried to expand on as the program has grown over the years. Go here to an overview. Again, it is an annual application cycle, so we accept applications for new marker topics every year. The past 10 years or so, that cycle has ran from about April to July. We will have information about next year's cycle available in the new year. If there are any changes to that, we'll make that available on our website. It's important to note that this is a very public-driven program. One of the questions we get the most is, why do you not have a marker on this topic? It could be something that is so significant in Indiana history. For the longest time, we had no marker for Madam C.J. Walker. We do not have a marker for Cole Porter, Ernie Pyle. And really, until we get an application submitted by a member of the public, and it is approved by our board, we can't move forward on marking a topic. The other thing is, it's very shared authority. So while obviously we have very important criteria for what is eligible for a marker, once we're into that process of crafting marker text, yes, there are guidelines we need to adhere to, but it is working with community partners to make sure that the story is being told accurately and appropriately, and that those stakeholders have a say and voice in that process. I talked about it already a little bit in terms of the primary source criteria. Really, when you're looking at the most important guidelines as we evaluate marker topics and marker applications as they come in, would be, is the topic supported with primary sources? And does the topic demonstrate statewide significance? That's another thing with a lot of our markers in the past. Many could be considered much more local, topics of local significance. Again, incredibly important, but considering the competitiveness of the marker program, the number of people who are interested in these markers, and the number that we can approve every year, really looking at what are these topics that really impacted the state or nation as a whole. If you search on our website, we have a drop-down menu for applying for a historical marker. It outlines the steps, but there's also 2 links in there, one being the guidelines for historical markers. That walks individuals through every step of the process, and also includes about 10 different criteria about eligibility for marker topics. One of the things that we try to avoid is superlatives. Everyone loves first, most, oldest, but those claims can be really difficult to prove at times. So really looking more at, can we craft something that says, maybe instead of first, it was an earlier pioneering or leader in this, and then how did it contribute to what unfolded afterwards? Did someone being the first, a great example of this would be Bill Garrett here in Indiana. He was probably the first African-American basketball player to participate in Big Ten basketball. Played at IU, broke the Big Ten color barrier. So instead of really looking at and focusing on the first, how his entry and being able to participate and play on IU's team then enabled other individuals to come after him and participate in Big Ten basketball as well. The other thing that we stress is for an individual, if you're interested in marking an individual, that person has to have been deceased for at least 20 years. And for an event, at least 50 years has to have passed since that event took place. We try to look at other state marker programs and their guidelines. Is pretty consistent across the board in terms of usually about 15 to 25 years is the standard for an individual. So Indiana falls right in that time period with the 20-year requirement. The other thing I would stress is, while marker topics and oftentimes markers are placed for a celebration and for a celebratory event, markers are really commemorative. They are not memorials. They're not celebratory. And in that vein, we have topics that we have marked that, tackle some really difficult subjects in Indiana history. And the goal of this is to just share what happened in Indiana's past and how we have grown since then. So you will find markers across the state that look at the eugenics movement in the early 1900s here. Look at racial terror lynchings and segregation. Again, not celebrating that this stuff happened, but acknowledging and recognizing that it did, and what were the steps that took place to grow from that. In terms of historic preservation and covenants, a lot of individuals will call me and say, hey, we would like to get a historical marker so that this building is not torn down in the future. Markers do not place any protections on historic sites. They can help call attention, of course, to the history that occurred there, which then may in turn lead to some protections being placed on that property. But a marker itself being placed there, unfortunately, will not guarantee that no construction will happen to that building. We do encourage for certain topics that are much more about historic preservation, maybe about architecture, to really work through Indiana Landmarks. It's a great organization, and DHPA, the Department of Historic Preservation and Archaeology. They work together on National Register nominations and do a great job preserving historic preservation and architecture in the state. As we look a little bit at why I believe that markers are important. Again, we get back to this idea of them being snapshots. They really help to mark points of interest in the state. We always say markers are only an introductory and starting point. The thing that's great about them is that they do make history accessible for so many individuals. Maybe someone does not have the time or does not want to make the heavy lift to go into a museum, or they visit a site and the museum is closed at that specific day. Maybe they don't want to do the heavy lifting of reading an entire book on a specific topic. A marker is a really nice way to just say, here are some overarching facts about this topic, how it impacted our state. And then for those who want to learn more, they're able to do so. And whether that's through our footnotes and annotations on our website that help to expand on what source material was used to support this marker and what are other stories that maybe didn't make the text, or the details, the information that didn't make the text, how can we expand on those? So there's great opportunities there. And maybe it's, again, looking at Indiana State Library collections, what else is available on this topic? Or again, if you want to even delve further from that, looking at other secondary sources that have been written after the fact about it. So I have here just an example of our Allison Machine Shop historical marker. And the individual up in the right-hand corner, for those who don't know, is James Allison. Allison was one of the co-founders of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway alongside Carl Fisher, Frank Wheeler, and Arthur Newby. And in 1915, he created a racing team here in Indianapolis, hoping to help fill the gap, as a lot of foreign-born drivers were participating in World War I and were not racing at that time. Eventually, he created, or soon after that, a precision machine shop in Speedway where they would work on race cars. But soon after this, he switched, shut down production, and made the machine shop work to help craft for aircraft engines, specifically Liberty aircraft engines. And flash forward to the 1930s and 1940s, the company was instrumental in creating the V-17 engine. When we look at significant points in Indiana history, this is a company, again, started as a racing team, would go on to create over an engine that was produced and helped fuel fighter aircraft for the Allied forces in World War II. Over 70,000 of these were produced. In addition to the marker, we have done an exhibit here in the State Library on Allison Machine Shop and Allison Engineering. We have done several blog posts that look at aircraft contributions here in the state. So again, showing how a marker can then lead to several other projects. One of the things, in addition to the question of why do we not already have a marker for this topic, is the statement that I get is, I had no idea that happened here, or I had no idea this individual was born here. We think of Harlan Sanders and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he got really grew his business after starting his restaurant in Corbin, Kentucky. But Harlan Sanders was born here in Indiana, in Henryville in Clark County. We had a marker that was actually installed down there right at the exit as you're getting off 65 in Henryville in 1992. But at the time, the marker really just looked at franchise names and didn't really look at who Sanders was, his time in Indiana, and then the growth of his business. So a couple of years ago, individuals who now live at the farmstead where he grew up, where Sanders grew up, were interested in placing a marker directly at the site. So it enabled us to really expand on his history and really look at his contributions to business, to food culture across the nation. Another marker here, pictured just below, is for Vinoge Farmstead. This marker was actually just dedicated last month, mid-October, and it looks at Swiss immigration in the state. Again, when we think about place names, so we have Switzerland County here in southeast Indiana. It was named because when Swiss immigrants came here, they named that area New Switzerland, and then eventually it went on to become Switzerland County. One of the interesting things about this topic and what it explores is Jean-Jacques Dufour, who was a Swiss immigrant. Originally came, he looked at settling in Kentucky, tried to establish vineyards there, did not have much success, and ended up writing to Thomas Jefferson to get a land grant to settle here in southern Indiana. And so he and several other Swiss immigrants would go on to create vineyards in this portion of Indiana and become an incredible successful wine industry here, nationally known by 1812. And then here on the left, we marker for the South Bend Blue Sox. The woman in red who is sitting in the wheelchair, that's Betsy Yoakum, who pitched for the Blue Sox in the 1940s. Indiana actually had two teams that were part of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. I don't know if those who've been following current news, they're actually starting a women's baseball league again here in 4 cities coming up. So it's great to have this marker. It was installed a couple years ago. Fort Wayne, I would love to see a state marker for the Fort Wayne Daisies. I know they did a local one a few years back, so I don't know, again, if there is another story to tell there. But it's great to be able to have one of these commemorate the state marker and, again, local signage to mark the other. Another thing with historical markers is that they are wonderful for marking anniversary commemorations. And it's always nice when you can have a marker that ties into other programming and events in a community. Our marker application, looking at that process, so there are a couple different major components of it. One being that the most important would be that we ask for 6 to 12 main points of significance. What is it about this topic that you are hoping to say? Why is it significant to the state of Indiana? In addition to that, we ask for at least one, if not a couple, primary sources to support each one of those points. Now, if a topic is approved, the Bureau does additional research beyond that, but that allows us to see that there is enough research out there to support that topic. The other sections ask for information about the marker location, which is a very extensive process. A lot of care and time goes into selecting a location that is appropriate, but also one that we can get permissions for. And oftentimes that can be a stumbling block in areas. Sometimes it requires additional permits through cities. And if it's private property, that can be a whole nother ballgame too. So if individuals have, who are on the call have questions about the how the location site permission process goes, feel free to shoot me a message about that. But another component of the application is what dedication plans do you have in mind if this application were to be approved? And that not only includes the date, that a time period when people are interested in dedicating, but will it be part of a larger exhibit? Is it part of some other programming in the community? Over the past few years, and especially over this last year, we had several markers that were being applied for because of either centennial or 150th anniversary celebrations. Most recently, we dedicated a marker right outside the Indiana State Library here just a couple weeks ago, denoting the history of the library, how it has evolved and served the public and the state over the years. Again, as I mentioned, ISL is celebrating its 200th anniversary this year. So it was a great way to cap off bicentennial programming, which had spanned the whole year, but then to kind of cement that and have that tangible reminder right outside ISL's doors. Coincidentally, the photo of the Indiana State Library that is pictured here, the work was done by the William P. Youngclass General Contracting Company. They also applied for a marker last year. It was completed in late summer, early fall, and we were waiting to have that marker installed and dedicated. But it, too, is the 150th anniversary of that company. So they have been doing several programs to commemorate its rich history here in the city of Indianapolis. That company was instrumental in constructing buildings that really shaped the fabric of our city here, including the Madam C.J. Walker building. And then to the left there, another marker that will actually be unveiled this week is for Riley Children's Hospital, which also is celebrating its 100th anniversary. That was actually last year. They applied for the marker last year. And again, this is kind of a continuation of their programming. But really, again, you don't have to apply for a marker for anniversary year by any means. But if there is some sort of tie-in that can help to kind of bolster its chances in any given application cycle. One of the big things with the historical marker program, we talk about tangible reminders of our past. Markers are a great way to return a story to the landscape and really show us too how a landscape has changed and evolved over the years. A great example of this really is here in Indianapolis along Indiana Avenue. Those who are familiar with the area, the early 1900s was a mecca of African-American culture, business, theater, music, just so many buildings dedicated to African-American sites. And again, with the construction of the interstates in the 1960s and 1970s, with the addition of the IUPUI, now IU and Purdue campuses, much of that was removed, demolished. So markers are a way to help return those stories and remind us of what existed in these spaces in the past. We have had a lot of applicants and community partners who have worked in recent years to add several of these markers to that space. We have markers there that give an overarching history of Indiana Avenue, markers for Crispus Attucks, which was one of three high schools constructed for African Americans to deal with issues of overcrowding in schools across the state. And example here I'd like to talk about is the Senate Avenue YMCA, which is located just down the street from Indiana Avenue at Senate and Michigan. As you can see from the photos on the left, what that building looked like when it was constructed and as it existed in the 1910s through much of the 20th century. If you look at where the marker is located now, and this is that exact same corner, there's obviously a huge parking lot. So you see how a space, again, has changed over time. And going forward here, I mentioned that we'd talk a little bit more about primary sources. Again, as we're doing research on these marker topics, it's really about digging as deep as we can to find as many sources as we can about these topics in Indiana history. So that might include using Sanborn maps like the one on the right, right above the circle that denotes it's Michigan Avenue, and then Michigan Street, and then obviously North Senate listed on the right there. And you can see the YMCA on that corner. For those who haven't used Sanborn maps, they are fantastic resources. If you can search them through a variety of means. They're available, some through the Library of Congress, some through IU's digital collections pages. And then actually inside the Indiana State Library, we have a link on our online resources page, which includes fire insurance maps. And the great thing about that resource is you can select a site and you can pull up all the Sanborn maps and base atlas maps available for that site over the years. And again, really see an overlay of how a piece of property has changed. Sanborn maps are also great because you never know what details you will find on them. Sometimes they will list things like the contractor. Sometimes they'll list, like when we did the Allison engineering marker that I mentioned before, it listed what aircraft engines it was working on. So again, it kind of varies over time. Sometimes it's just the name of the building. Sometimes there's no name listed. But fantastic tools that I would encourage you guys to use. On the left there is a image from a 1915 city directory, which also lists the YMCA, shows where it is located. Again, city directories, another fantastic resource. I've given a program on how to use city directories and the research that you can glean from them in the past at several libraries. But they are great. Think of them kind of like early telephone books. But you can search them not only by name of individual, name of business, organization, church, whatever it might be that you're interested in. But a lot of times, and as you'll see here for the YMCA, it'll list key players who were involved in those institutions. Same thing with like a church, it might list who was the pastor at that time. Or if it's a business, what was that business associated with? What products was it producing? So there's a lot of information to glean from those too. Thinking back in terms of returning stories to the historical landscape. Some other great examples for those, I gave the example of Swiss immigration here in the state. We have several markers that have looked at ethnic history and immigrant communities across Indiana. Most recently, we have done markers for Hungarian immigrants in Terre Haute. We've done markers for the Greek immigrant community and Romanians here in Indianapolis. And we also have 2 markers that we've done over the years for the Syrian community. Again, one of those is in Terre Haute and one is here in Indianapolis and was placed on the grounds of Lucas Oil Stadium. When I talk about site permission and hoops that sometimes we have to go through, as you can imagine, there's a lot of steps for getting a historical marker placed on Lucas Oil's grounds. But it's great. I see so many people walking by as they're walking, whether it's into a Colts game, a concert, and stopping to read that marker and getting an idea of the community that existed at that site years prior to a football stadium being there. I think sometimes, we think of immigration being sometimes a more recent thing with certain groups. Syrians were here in the late 1800s, early 1900s, building a vibrant community. So again, these markers help to share some of that history across the state. And then another thing is inspiring us to grow. One of the things I love about the marker program, I've talked about this at programs in the past, is we have a lot of markers that are placed on school grounds. And I always think that is a special place when you have, like here, the marker featured Falrath Hines. He was an abstract artist. He went on to work at the Smithsonian. But he attended Crispus Attucks School, was one of the first graduating classes there. And so for those students who are attending that school to see, a marker placed on those grounds of an individual who walked through those same halls and went on to have a career of national significance, I think can be inspiring to some individuals. We have, a marker we did on the grounds of the State House commemorating the women's suffrage centennial just a few years ago. Again, another one where I talk about site permission. This one actually had to go through the General Assembly, had to craft a bill just for us to be able to have this marker on the grounds as they looked at, how much signage was already placed there. So it was a great gathering and group that came together to do this marker. And that's the one thing too I would stress about the marker program. I talked about the collaborative nature of it early on. Many hands make light work. And so markers are a great way for communities to come together, several different organizations, whether it is helping to plan with the dedication or it's helping to pitch in for the funding of that marker. Applicants are responsible for the funds for those. We have had over the years occasional grant programs. We do not have any currently, but I'm constantly on the hunt for those. How to go about finding a historical marker. If you search our website, it's in.gov/history. And on the left-hand column, there is a drop-down tab for state historical markers and then find a marker. So you can search the whole alphabetical list. I will say I do need to go back and add some that were added this summer and early fall. But hopefully here in the next few weeks, those will be all up to date. You can also search by counties. That'll pull up a county map and then you can see the list from there. or by category. So if you're specifically interested in women's history or sports history, you're able to search in that manner. Dating back to 1946, when the marker program began, we have worked with community partners to install over 750 markers across the state. Markers continuing to grow. We have several markers in our manufacturer's queue currently. So we will be approaching 800 here within this next year. We have markers in 91 of our 92 counties. People always ask, what is the one county without one? It is J County. And, since I started at the Bureau, has been one of my goals to get a marker placed in every county. When I started, I think we had 5 counties that did not have any, filled 4 of those. And I am working with the Society of Indiana Pioneers on a potential marker for J County for next year. So looking forward to that and hoping that goes through. The other thing I'll list here and make note of is there is a website in addition to the Bureau. It's the Historical Marker Database, so hmdb.org. HMDB lists not only several of our state markers, but it's a volunteer organization publication online that lists markers and signage really all across the world. So you can search by country, filter down obviously to the United States and Indiana, or if you're traveling elsewhere and you're interested in other portions of the country. But the great thing is that in addition to our state markers, like I said, there are several local markers listed. For those interested in how do you tell the distinction, there is a credit line on the bottom of side 2 of every state marker that will often list, installed the year, Indiana Historical Bureau. But the key indicator is in the outline, the crest at the top, it has the outline of the state of Indiana. So sometimes a marker will look remarkably similar to our state markers, but it might have a different logo. Perhaps it's a DAR sign or was installed by the county itself and they have the outline of their county or something else significant to the county. So that is a great way to distinguish between the two. And the picture to the right, we've been working with a state agency here in Indiana, Management Performance Hub, on a more interactive marker database. I am trying to clean up some GPS coordinates for some of those, but the wonderful thing about this is it will allow people to cross-reference and filter markers across the state in a variety of ways. So if you're interested not only in multiple categories at one time, say you're interested, in women's and sports history, and you want to know only markers that were installed after 2000, you'll be able to do so. Another great thing about this is that we will have the conditions listed of these markers, poor, good, and excellent. And this helps. We get so many people who are interested in volunteering to repaint markers. So it's a great way to see what markers are in need of some TLC. And additionally with this is that it will also list what markers are no longer standing. So as you can imagine, over the years, we've had several that either have been involved in vehicular incidents, snowplows can be deadly. We have had even a rogue deer that has run off the road and run into a marker. It's, every day brings something new, but that'll help individuals, if you're interested in touring your specific site and, you're able to see that a marker is no longer standing. I'll just get through these next 2 slides pretty quickly. We've installed a variety of new markers over this past year. And I use that word variety because, one of the great things about the marker program is its breadth and its range of topics. We're always getting to research something new, which makes it a really rewarding process. So as you can see here, many different ones have been placed here in 2025. Studebaker Corporation had been on our wish list for a long time, so we were excited to see that one finally dedicated. Elizabeth Eaglesfield, who was a pioneering lawyer here in Indiana, she was practicing law in 1875, and that's obviously, Indiana women did not get the right to vote until 1920. So well before that she was participating in the legal field. And as we look at upcoming markers, again, we see that variety. Some of these have already been completed, as I mentioned, and are just pending installation. Others are in our manufacturer's queue. One that we're really looking forward to, Vesto and Earl Pfeiffer in Clinton County. That'll be Clinton County's only its 2nd marker at the state level. But the Pfeiffers were integral to astronomy. Both grew up attending Frankfurt schools and then IU, and then both went out to have careers at Lowell Observatory in Arizona. And Vesto was integral to the discovery of Pluto. Earl was integral to photographing color images of Mars. So we don't have too much on science that we've marked with regards to the marker program over the years. When we look at gaps in the program, it continues to amaze me for a state that loves basketball tradition, basketball history, and motorsports. We still are pretty limited, considering that we have 750 plus markers. There still are only a handful of them that really look at sports history and primarily motorsports and basketball. We've seen an increase in the number of markers on agriculture, women's history, African-American history over the years. And we'll actually be doing a marker here coming up for 2026 on Fred Menon and Jiffy Pop, which, again, one of those topics that people are like, oh, I had no idea Jiffy Pop was created here in Indiana, but it was in LaPorte County. So we'll be looking at that, and that'll allow us to look at not only business history, economics and labor in that area, but food and cultural history as well. So different ways to get involved in the marker program. One, if you're interested, come out, attend a marker dedication. We try to promote these on our social media pages, Instagram and Facebook. And we also send out press releases in advance. Majority, again, are open to the public. We've seen a great uptick in attendance at these programs over the years, over this past year in particular. So I've had several that range from 100 to 200 individuals, which is just fantastic to see. Maybe you're interested in applying for a new marker. If so, I encourage you to visit our website. Like I said, you can look at the criteria and the guidelines. And then if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to address those. And if you have draft points that you want to submit and say, hey, is this something that might be eligible for a state marker, or would it be better suited for local signage, an exhibit, a blog post, something to that effect. There's so many local history stories out there that might not meet the criteria for the marker program. We want to make sure those stories are still preserved and shared in the community. Other ways to get involved, you'll see here in the top left corner, a marker that was broken just this past spring, Sarah Park Morrison, down in Washington County. She was one of the first women to attend IU. And for those, oftentimes, if I don't get a phone call from someone saying, oh my gosh, a marker was just damaged, it's down, it's missing, we don't know. It's a big state, so we really rely on people to reach out to us and let us know when a marker has gone down. So that way we can work with, insurance companies, police departments to determine what happened and how to get that marker back up. Another great way to get involved, especially as we look at preparing for plans for America's 250th next year, is to clean or repaint historical markers. I am so grateful to so many volunteers who have stepped up and reached out to us and repainted markers. I mean, we've had over 10 that have been repainted this year, which is just fantastic. You can see the Oliver P. Morton home marker feature here in Wayne County. Sometimes it's night and day. Just, sometimes it could just be cleaning the marker. Like I said, maybe, debris has gotten onto it or lichen from a tree or other foliage in the area. And one of the great things about it is great for people of all ages. We've had DAR groups involved in repainting. We have had honor societies, Boy Scout and Eagle troops, or Eagle Scout troops as well. And just individuals who are interested in taking these projects on. If it is something that you're interested in, we do have a marker repainting guide. We also will prepare a permission letter just so that, these are state assets and state property. That way, if anyone is questioning why you're working on the marker, you have that letter in hand. In the right-hand corner, National Historical Marker Day. We have partnered with an organization over the past few years, William G. Pomeroy Foundation out of New York. They have been very committed to preserving history across the nation. They were actually one of the groups when I was mentioning grant funding. They provided a 2-year grant cycle for us that helped offset marker costs for applicants in 2022 and 2023. But every year, the last Friday of April, they do a National Historical Marker Day, shining a spotlight on markers across the country, encouraging people to get out and clean these markers or at least visit them and get to know the history in their communities. Just this past year, they actually expanded it to National Historical Marker Weekend. So it's a great way. Again, you don't have to repaint a marker that weekend, but if it is a project that you're interested in, it's a great way to do it at that time. And there's a whole social media campaign that they like to promote. Sometimes if you apply through them too, they will send you cleaning products to help, brushes and towels and stuff. So something to consider going forward. It would be great to see some of these, cleaned and cared for, especially, as I said, heading into the 250th. The other way to get involved, come visit us. This is a photo of the Indiana Historical Bureau space. We are located right on the first floor of the Indiana State Library, so right near the State House. And this space, we just renamed it this past year in honor of one of our former directors, Pamela J. Bennett. It's the Pamela J. Bennett Historical Marker Center. But it also doubles as our rare books and manuscripts reading room. That was changed this past summer. The manuscripts here at the library, there's so many thousands of fantastic materials here. I would encourage you, if you are interested in researching something, set up an appointment with us. You can come in. We can make sure those collections are pulled for you. We do ask for some heads up notice, so staffing needs that we are able to get you the materials that you need in an appropriate time. We also have, as I mentioned earlier, all of our marker files. So if you are interested in learning more about a marker that you pass by in your travels, and you're not seeing something on our website, or you're interested in more, just let us know. If you're interested in setting up an appointment to look at that file, or if there's a specific source from that file that you're eager to see, we can share that as well. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over for questions. I appreciate all of you guys listening in today, and for being able to share this history of the marker program. It's a program that's near and dear to me, and it's always rewarding to be able to work with Hoosiers across the state, and people sometimes outside the state. We have had so many individuals actually from outside Indiana who maybe want to mark some of their ancestors who were of statewide significance here. So it's always exciting when, we have a whole flock of individuals from, Louisiana, California, Michigan come out here to Indiana to, promote the history here. So again, look forward to hearing what questions you guys have, and eager to answer those.
All right. Thank you so much, Casey. I found this absolutely fascinating. I learn so much every time, and thank you for sharing this with us. I will open up if there's any questions. We have about a little under 15 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, please use the chat, and I will do my best to go through them. I do see a question, and it's from Charles Rude, who said, Carnegie is 250 next year. Any thoughts on Indiana Carnegies? And
that is, so say, because of the number of Carnegie markers that we do have across the state, about 2012, when they revised the state marker guidelines, we had shied away from marking too many more of those. That being said, if there is another story or angle that we can tell on that, very eager to be able to do so. So if you want to send me information about the specific Carnegie Library that you have, or that you're interested in marking, and again, any key points that might be different from some of the ones that we've marked previously, I'm happy to look into that and get back to you on it.
Great. Also from Nicole, she says, thanks so much for all your work, Casey. We need to clone you. Sorry if I missed this, but what are the topics you're marking in 2026?
Oh, great. So I mentioned Jiffy Pop, so we'll be doing that one. We are doing a marker for Eli Lilly, which is also celebrating, when I talk about anniversary years, it is celebrating its 150th anniversary. in 2026. So that'll be part of larger programming for them. We are doing a marker on, oh my gosh, Reverend Moses Broyles, who established or was integral to Second Baptist Church here in Indianapolis, which was located on Michigan Street. Broyles was one of the first Black students to attend Eleutherian school, and he was a former slave, and then purchased his freedom and came up to Indiana. So we'll be doing a marker on him. Let me think. What am I missing? We're doing a marker on Carpenter Body Works. It was a Carpenter Bus Manufacturing Company. So it was out of Lawrence County. This will be the 5th state marker that Lawrence County has. They had actually applied last year, and that's something I should mention too. We'll often get, because of the competitiveness of the program and only being able to do so many markers in a given cycle, sometimes, application is so close and we're just not able to put it through because of the numbers in a given year, or maybe it's just missing a couple primary sources or a little bit more on the statewide significance. So if you think that topic has potential, we will go ahead, potential for a state marker. Again, there's always potential for local signage and other programming, but for a state marker, we will always encourage that applicant to reapply. And we're happy to work with them to, again, whether it's adding more primary sources or strengthening some of the main points. So Carpenter Body Works last year, they had applied, just missed the cut for the number of markers that we were able to approve. So we'll be working on that. One of their buses is actually in the Smithsonian, but the company was really instrumental in bus safety. And I know from talking to people in Southern Indiana, many are like, oh my gosh, I rode a Carpenter bus. And it also will look at the differences in the evolution of, going from wooden chassis to metal and other safety features with that. So I'm missing one other marker. For the life of me, I cannot think. I will say, due to some changes here in staffing at the Bureau over the last year, we significantly reduced the number of markers that were approved. Which again is really tough going forward. But at the same time, we're hoping to be able to increase those numbers as we move forward. And I mentioned too that we have several markers still in our manufacturer's queue. So I know there will be no shortage of them still being dedicated throughout 2026.
Yeah, you're going to be busy through 26. But a lot of exciting things are going to be happening. So that's great.
Yeah.
If someone were to ask about restoring an old marker, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. So if it is a state marker, again, it would depend if the marker can be repaired or if it needs to be replaced. So if that individual wants to send us photos of the marker, it's hard to say definitively, but oftentimes, even if a marker is cracked at the wing cap, which is the portion that secures the marker to the post, a marker can often still be repaired in that instance, unless those cracks extend upward and start to get too close to the main body text. Because then the fear is always that rewelding that is just going to create the crack, make the cracks go farther up, and it's not going to be sustainable for the future. Repair, obviously, advantages of that is that it's usually less costly. It's usually a little bit quicker of a process. If the marker does need to be replaced, oftentimes, unless it is a marker that was installed over the last 10 to 15 years, 20 years, we'll often work to update that marker text, or at least review it to make sure that the statements are accurate, that we're not omitting certain groups that maybe should, their history wasn't excluded when the marker was first installed. So that is more of a process of working with community partners, not only to get the funding for that replacement, but then to make sure that that text is accurate and adhering to guidelines. So again, a little bit more work involved in that. But it's also a great opportunity to update a historical marker and, again, make sure that we are meeting those guidelines as they stand today. Now, I don't know that I mentioned this in the program, but prior to 1997, almost every marker featured the same text on both sides. In 1997, that changed. We started featuring different text. So again, obviously, the opportunity to include so much more history of a specific topic expanded by being able to do that.
Oh, great. Thank you. So just as an FYI, I've included our emails, Casey's and my email, in the chat. So if you would like to ask any more questions, or Deneen Merklin, I know that you asked about the restoring. So if you want to send any pictures to Casey, you can. Our emails are in the chat. I will take one more question, and this is from Karen Keller. She asked, this may have been answered, but where are the markers made?
Oh, great question. It was not answered, so a wonderful question. The markers are made in Marietta, Ohio. It is a company known as Siwa Studios. We've worked almost exclusively with Siwa since 1946. We had a short period in the mid 1990s where we worked with another company, but Siwa does official state markers for over half the states in the country. They really have a niche in the program. Yeah, we've had great experiences working with them. They also will do local signage. So, if you are interested in a topic that might not meet the market program guidelines, but you want to reach out to them to see if they can craft something for your community, they do that as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for presenting for us, Casey. This was absolutely wonderful. And like I said, I have provided our emails in the chat, so please feel free to email us with any questions or with any information. I've also included a link to our archive training page, where you can find other archived What's Up Wednesdays and webinars there as well. And again, thank you so much for being with us today, Casey. This was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
And
If you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to us.
yes, and I will be sure to send out LEUs to everyone who attended today in person. And I will hopefully get those out soon. Hopefully it won't take 30 days. But I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Keep warm, and thank you again for being here. We can stop the recording.